Today, we'll explore the frontier of human consciousness with Paul Citarella, Chief Technology Officer at the Monroe Institute, a pioneering organization dedicated to the understanding of the full spectrum of human awareness. We'll unpack the science, technology, philosophy behind the Institute's groundbreaking work, from Hemi-Sync and binaural beats that guide the mind into altered states, to the ways Monroe integrates neuroscience, spirituality, and cutting-edge technology to expand our understanding of consciousness. Paul will take us behind the scenes of the Institute's research, sharing how these audio technologies are designed, validated, and applied, while exploring questions that touch the very edge of human experience: out-of-body experiences, life after death, and the future of consciousness itself. If you've ever wondered how the brain interacts with sound to unlock hidden states of awareness, or how technology can safely and effectively enhance spiritual exploration, you won't want to miss our conversation. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Paul, thank you so much for joining me on Rebelliously Curious. As most people know, and I've mentioned before on the podcast, I was at the Monroe Institute about, a month and a half ago. And I've spoken about it on the podcast recently. I've talked about lucid dreaming. I've talked about consciousness in some of my recent shows. But now I actually have somebody here from the Monroe Institute to talk a little bit more just about binaural beats, what the Monroe Institute does, the history around the Monroe Institute, who is Bob Monroe. Most people would ask that question. Who is this man or this magical man that knows so much about consciousness, or did at one point? So, But first of all, I'd like to say thank you for joining the podcast today.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you for having me. Excited to be here. Yep.
Wonderful to have you. So let's start off first. Can we talk and just define what is the Monroe Institute?
Yeah. So the Monroe Institute was founded by Robert Monroe. And basically, the short story, we can certainly talk a lot about Robert Monroe's experiences, but he was a radio broadcast executive in the 50s. And he started investigating sleep learning at the time. And this was when TV was starting to kind of replace radio, and he was looking for something else to kind of focus on. And he started doing these experiments in sleep learning and using sound to help people get to sleep and into a state where they could absorb information and retain it while they're sleeping. And the long story short, he started having spontaneous out-of-body experiences. So he would have these experiences where he's going to sleep at night, he'd get these really intense vibration feelings in his body, and ultimately had this experience of separating from his body and actually then seeing it there. And it was terrifying. And he went down this road of exploring this medically. He thought he was dying. He thought he was going crazy. And that wasn't the case. So then he became really curious and wanted to understand what was this experience that he was having. And so he founded the Monroe Institute basically originally to explore this and to try to understand this thing that was incredible to him. It was changing his life. It changed his understanding of the human experience, really. So the Monroe Institute was founded in the 1970s to basically investigate that. And he was a wealthy guy. He had resources. So he was able to set all this up really originally for the purposes of satisfying his own curiosity and trying to understand this phenomenon. And then it evolved from there, because in studying this phenomenon, he had to be able to teach other people how to do it. So that he had more people that he could study and test with. So it evolved from its sort of research origin to now being sort of research and education. So that, what we do today is we basically teach people how to explore consciousness in a variety of different ways through a variety of different modalities. And you've been to Gateway. That was the original program that Robert Monroe created to essentially teach people how to have these experiences. And it's not necessarily about the out-of-body experience. It's more like giving you a systematic method for exploring consciousness so that you can then basically find your own answers.
I love the way that you phrase that, because some people ask me like, Chris, you're joining a cult now or something to that degree. And I said, no, it's like exactly. I'm like, no, it's a
Yeah.
system. I said, and I
Right.
said, and it can be so basic by using numbers and colors.
Right.
And that is not a hit to the way that the program's done. It's actually a compliment to it because anyone can do it. You know, the basic understanding of colors and numbers are just so infantile to us. You know, we know it as such a kid and something we can recognize, and everybody can. And so I find that it's just a wonderful way to explain consciousness to people or bring them through levels of consciousness because they can all relate to it. There's
Yeah.
something that you use though, it's called Hemi-Sync or binaural beats. Can we break down, you know, what is Hemi-Sync and then what are binaural beats? Because I believe they're obviously binaural beats is what are being used, but there's
Yeah.
specific types of binaural beats, and Hemi-Sync is the brand, and they're considered Hemi-Sync meditation as well. So can we break down those two and what similarities and what some differences?
Yeah, definitely. So in the early days when Bob Monroe was trying to teach other people to have these experiences, he was obviously an sound engineer, so he was experimenting with sound. And it was in the 1970s that the team that he was working with first actually discovered or read about binaural beats. It was an article in Scientific American magazine that talked about this phenomenon, this auditory hallucination of binaural beats. And they started using binaural beats as a means of entrainment. So what that basically means, entrainment is not something that's new. It's been around for thousands of years. So there's tons of spiritual traditions of people, chanting or using drums or any kind of rhythmic, audio source that people are listening to as they're entering these mystical states of awareness. And the fundamental principle here with entrainment is that you're basically getting some periodic stimulus to your senses. And in our case, we're talking about hearing, right? Because this is audio. And what happens is, let's say the simple example, you're beating a drum. And if you're doing that, say 6 times a second, you're beating the drum. What's happening is that sound is reaching your ears. It's being converted, by all of your brain and everything into these electrical signals. And that's causing your auditory cortex to fire in response to that beating drum. So some of the neurons in your brain start firing every 6 times a second, right? According to that drum beat. And what happens is, as that continues, that 6 hertz or 6 times per second, that frequency starts to create more of that response in your brain, in your brain waves. So Bob Monroe called this a frequency following response. Like you're listening to this frequency of the beating drum 6 times per second, 6 hertz, and you're getting that response in your brain waves, and then more of your brain waves, it starts to propagate around different areas in your brain, and it basically causes more of that activity in your brain at that specific frequency, 6 hertz, and that's just an example. So that's the core process of entrainment. It's basically encouraging your brain to exhibit more of this certain type of brainwave. And we know that our brain waves are directly correlated to our state of awareness. We know this by studying people, sleep. I mean, this is just general knowledge for decades at this point. So like we know, for example, when you're in a state of meditation, you're generally in that 6 hertz area. It might be, anywhere between 4 and 8 hertz. And those are called theta brainwaves. We have names for different frequencies of brainwaves. So that's the basis of entrainment. And when Bob Monroe started creating this technology, he coined this term Hemi-Sync. It's short for hemispheric synchronization. And what they were seeing at the time was that, as these frequencies, these brain waves would sort of propagate around your brain, it would be all in both hemispheres of your brain. So they thought of it as a way to create activity that was kind of unifying both hemispheres of your brain and creating this, what he called a whole brain state. So that's where Hemi-Sync comes from. And the original technology that they used early on was binaural beats, and we still use that today in the core programs that you've experienced. And so that's the Hemi-Sync technology. So it's binaural beats, but then the other element of this is Bob Monroe mapped out these different states of awareness that he called focus levels because he wanted to avoid using any kind of terminology that was spiritual or had some other meaning. And so this is what you explore in Gateway. You start with focus 10, which is a state where your mind awake and your mind is awake and your body is asleep. And then you go through these successive focus levels and they're different states. And so part of that original Hemi-Sync technology was using the binaural beats, but also creating specific recipes of layered binaural beats that corresponded to these states of awareness. And this was the research that they did in those early days, was figuring out when you're in this specific state called focus 10, what do your brain waves look like? And it's always a mix. Like it's when anytime, we're doing anything, our brainwave is never just exhibiting one frequency, universally. It's always a mix of different things. Even when you're meditating, it's not like you only have that, theta brainwave. There's other things that are going on as well. And as Bob and his team were mapping out these different states of awareness, they basically were able to say, okay, when we're in this state, it's a combination of these layers of brainwaves, and they could then build that into the audio so that when other people listen to it, they're getting these similar mix of brainwaves, and they correspond to these specific states of awareness. So that's essentially where, how this technology started. And
Such a great
then
explanation.
yeah. And then, from there it has evolved. So over the last, say, 10 years or so, that innovation has continued at Monroe Institute. So now we're investigating and developing other ways beyond binaural beats to do this kind of entrainment. As we look at the progress in just general science and sort of our understanding of the brain and brain waves, that has advanced a lot in the last 20 to 30 years. And at the same time, the technology that we have for audio production has advanced incredibly. So we're now exploring how do we use the latest cutting edge audio technology combined with the best understanding that we have now of how our brains actually work and how brainwaves correlate to these states of consciousness to create kind of, the next generation of the technology. So we do that today under a brand that we call Monroe Sound Science. So that's kind of where we are today. So it's kind of this long history of innovation and using audio to help people access these states of awareness.
It's wonderful. And so people are from both sides. You have the neurological side, you have the science community, you have the technology community, right? That's always advancing, you were saying, within audio. And then you have the spiritual side of the community that's saying, maybe we don't want these things integrated, right? Through and looking at this from a consciousness, spiritual perspective, right? What's your thoughts when you get into that nitty gritty and that fine line? Because I know when I was at the Monroe Institute, one of the things that was not really, not say frowned upon, but not said, please don't use was AI tech, right? I think that there was some negative feelings towards speaking to AI in that way. Not saying that everyone feels like this, but I think that this was something that was just kind of agreed upon when we were there. Like, use your own internal consciousness scope and compass to be able to understand how you're feeling and what it means in context of yourself to your greater self. And so I get that. And there's that spiritual underlay with it. But then you also have, right, and that's a form of advanced technology, but you're also then within a program that is using advanced technology like binaural beats. So where is that fine line that when you use tech and when you don't, when you're at Monroe?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, obviously the tech is a big component of what we do, right? Because we're giving people access to states of awareness that you'd otherwise have to meditate for, years to really attain. So we're kind of like opening this up to the world through technology. So that's, an important part of what we do. And I think there's, I use AI. A lot of us, at Monroe use AI in our day to day. I mean, it's everywhere, and it's an incredibly valuable tool, it sort of helps in a lot of different ways. And I think that, it's almost, I would say it's up to individuals to sort of decide how they want to embrace this. I wouldn't say that at Monroe we have any particular, kind of, I don't know, dogma that we're trying to enforce around AI. So if you find there's value in that, then great. I think the challenge is, though, AI is essentially trained on what everybody's talking about, right? It's mirroring essentially all of the content that it's trained on back to us. And when you're exploring some of these states, there may not be a lot out there in terms of what these states actually mean. So if you're kind of asking AI, like, what did I experience when this happened? You'll get an answer based on kind of the general consensus of what that might mean, which may or may not be what you want. It could be helpful if you want to know generally kind of, what people are experiencing. But the experiences you have are so personal to you. It's hard to say that like there's anything that could just globally interpret that. When you're in these states of consciousness, a lot of what you get is very sort of symbolic. The experiences that you have or things that come through to you, whether it's visual or whatever it might be, they're meaningful to you. So in a lot of cases, it's almost like dream interpretation. Like you have to kind of interpret things based on their meaning to you, and that's a very personal thing. So that's where I think AI may not be as helpful. Like AI can't tell you what the symbology of a church means to you. That could mean different things to different people, right? So that's where I'd kind of draw that line, if that makes sense.
It does. I fully agree with this because I actually respected when they said don't, when I was at Gateway, it was kind of like leave AI to the side for a little bit, leave all
Mm.
social and things to the side. And that's what I
Yeah.
did, right? Because you
Yeah.
want to be immersed in the experience and you want to be able to be present, right?
Yeah.
And be able to understand what is coming up in your consciousness that is telling you. The one thing I think that people, if you haven't experienced the Monroe Institute or you haven't looked into it, people are hearing focus levels, numbers, colors. They're like, what is this?
Mm.
And so I think that breaking down, it's hard because every conscious level or focus level is different for everyone else. But
Right.
can we walk through maybe the technology based on each level and then how it could relate to consciousness or an experience that someone could have within maybe, let's say, focus, 10 to 12 and then, going all the way up to 21. We don't have to do all of them, but maybe an example of the three. Because
Yeah.
I think people want to know, what are binaural beats doing, right?
Yeah.
I'm listening to it, what's happening, and what should I experience potentially in this level? And
Right.
what does consciousness mean in these focus levels? Like that's the consistency when people can't visualize it. And I want to give them this visualization or audio understanding of it so that they can start to wrap their mind around it and then maybe able to put a visualization to it.
Yeah. Great. Um, So in terms of we can't get too deep into the specifics of what technologically is happening with each focus level. That's kind of the secret sauce. So each focus level is different combinations of these entrainment signals. And it could be across the board, like it may have elements of theta or even beta or gamma. So the exact mix of those that's been kind of developed at Monroe over the decades, that's kind of the magic of these states. But from an audio perspective, it's different layers and different mixes of these entrainment signals, binaural beats, in the case of Gateway. So that's kind of the mechanics of what makes that happen. And so it's encouraging these very specific combinations of brain waves, in your brain. And that's what's helping you access these states of awareness. And then we talk about these states, like focus 10, we say is the mind awake, body asleep. And that's a state where, pretty much like it says, it's your body is and all of the things that we do, it's progressively detaching almost from your physical senses and getting more immersed in this non-physical reality. So focus 10 is kind of the entry point to that, where your body's very deeply relaxed, and your mind is still awake and alert. So you're getting, very little sense data from your physical senses. And in the case when you're at Monroe, you're lying down, as you know, you're in the dark, you've got your headphones on. So you're trying to disconnect from your physical senses and just, maintain that awareness in sort of the non-physical sense. And then when you go to focus 12, we call that a state of expanded awareness. And that's where, you're going a bit deeper. And the way that Bob Monroe described these things, he described them as kind of signposts or like waypoints. As you go on this journey into sort of deeper and deeper states of consciousness, you're kind of setting these markers as these different focus levels so that you have something that you're familiar with. And so it's just a nice way to progressively introduce you to exploring these deep states of consciousness that isn't just plunging you into the deep end, like right away. So get to focus 12, and that's expanded awareness. Less, almost no physical sensation at this point. Your body, your physical sense data is kind of turned off, and you're really now immersed in this, your mental space, your sort of non-physical awareness. Then we go to focus 15, and that's a state of no time. So people generally describe that as a state where it's like time ceases to exist. It doesn't feel linear anymore. And some people describe it as a void state where you're just seeing this eternal sort of blackness, this kind of void. And then you go on from there to focus 21. And that's what Bob Monroe called a bridge state. It's sort of like the jumping off point to what he would call other energy systems. And now we're getting into a lot of the really deep stuff that Bob Monroe wrote about in his books. But that's when you start interacting with, other, other realities, other intelligences, whatever you might want to term that. And the experience, again, is different for everybody. So that's kind of the quick tour. What's interesting about these two is that, as you said, they are different for everyone. It's not like you can just say, "Oh, here's exactly what Focus 10 feels like for everybody," because it isn't quite the same for everybody. We have general understandings of what these states feel like, but your experience of Focus 10 versus Focus 12 might be different, from mine.
Yeah, it's true. I found myself, I remember we went in to go to Focus 15 in the
Hmm.
void. And I'm like, am I doing this right? Am I doing this right? And
Yeah.
our teachers put up a picture on the wall, like on in the screen, and I just stopped and I went, oh my God. I'm like, I'm there all the time. And I'm like, I go there so fast. And I
Wow.
just, my mouth dropped and I just stared at it for a while because I was like, and they didn't say, this is the void. They just had that image up and I just was staring at it.
Mm.
And so I think for me, it was a quick movement, but I didn't know. And I think that's the part that some people will start to do this. And for me, it took about 4 days for it to really kick in.
Mm. Yeah.
To say I have to
That's
have my, I had to, some people have, their breakthrough moments at day 3 and mine was day 4. But the
Yep.
one thing I did notice, and and people have been asking me, Chrissy, are you going to do your own personal blog on this and a podcast? I will. I'm still debating, as you know, Paul. I think
Hmm.
there's so many there's so many positive things about the Monroe Institute, but there's so many personal experiences that you're like, do
Yeah.
I share all these things? And I'm a
Right.
very open person, and so I am still debating, which is kind of funny on how I'm going to go about doing this and how I'm going to talk about this experience, this full experience. And if I'm going to do it, I'm probably will do it to the fullest, right?
Yeah. Well,
But
you hit on it. I mean, it's such a deeply personal experience because
yes,
it
it
opens up
is.
so many different things. It depends on where you are in your life, what's important to you. I mean, again, yeah, it's very personal.
It is. And I noticed when we did the first meditation. So when you, and I've been curious to ask somebody this, and I love that I'm talking to someone about the technology because it
Hmm.
just makes sense. So when I get into my checkpoint, and for anyone knowing, and I have put up pictures of the checkpoint and I will again, it's just kind of looks like a little cubby and you're in the
Hmm.
wall and it's a bed, but it's pretty much blacked out. You have a curtain and you're full in darkness, and then you're putting the headset on to listen to binaural beats and do these meditations. And so when I was in the checkpoint, the first time we go to do a meditation, and it's not in any focus level, it's just a meditation, I instantly saw purple and blue.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it was and I came out and I was like, wow. Like all I said was, wow. And it's funny because I've done a form of light meditation, light work when it comes to there's a device. I forget what it's actually called. They put it over your head and you look at it and it's white light, but they change the frequency or the
Yeah.
right.
Could be
And
Roxiva, maybe.
that might be it. I've
There's a
done it
couple
with
of these
the
devices out there that do. It's light-based entrainment. Same idea.
yes.
The flashing lights are causing the brain waves. It's the same concept. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I was seeing a whole bunch of colors and I was actually going into the void, which for people, the void is like, when you were a little kid, and this is the most random reference, but sometimes kids will push their eyes so that they can see stars. And for
Mm.
me, I laughed because I was like, oh, that's stuff I would do all the time as a kid, which sounds probably like super weird for me to say out loud. But it
Nothing's
but
weird at Monroe.
yeah, seriously. And so
Yeah.
I realized though that maybe what I was doing was trying to, as a kid, consistently get there. Because to me, every time I did that, I felt like I was in the cosmos. And so
Oh,
it
right.
instantly brought me back to that childhood memory when I saw the void. But yeah, sorry. I'm just rambling now. But the whole point for me going in, and sorry, and I should say, the void is like, I'll put it up. It's like pretty much a starry background, if you could say it is. For me,
Yeah.
it was. Yeah.
People also describe it sometimes as almost what feels like a 3D blackness.
Yes.
And I've had this experience. It's weird because like you think blackness is just like nothing, but it has this spatial quality to it. like you're in this 3D, kind of void environment. So that's a common thing that people describe.
Yeah. And here's maybe I was doing a Monroe Focus 21 level exercise not yesterday, the day before. And for me, I was kind of like hanging out in that void at one point, but I noticed and I was like, this has to be the binaural beat. Maybe I'm clicking out, is that's a saying when you're in and out of your focus level. But when I was in, I could notice that there was this texture and it was coming at me, but it was a very textured look, if that makes sense. And I remember thinking to myself, and I was moving through it. And I'm like,
yeah, right.
Right. And I was like, is this the void, but in a different way of looking at it? But I'm moving through this texture. And it was such a wild, and it was the only thing that really happened in that conscious experience, but it was still something. And it still made me feel like I was moving in it. But when I realized, I was like, this is the binaural beat working in the frequency of my brain. This is the technology. And that's kind of what came up to me, is I'm experiencing the technology in this conscious level, but it's becoming texturized for me.
Right, right. Yeah, the technology is what is enabling you to access that and have that experience. It's helping, like you could do that. You could meditate. Again, experienced meditators have been reaching these states all the time, for thousands of years. But it's just, again, making it that much easier for anyone to just put on the headphones and access those kinds of states. And that's great. And again, it's like everyone feels that differently. But texture, it's interesting because some people, it almost depends on how you're kind of wired in terms of how you experience these states. Some people are very visual, and some people will have very visual experiences where they're literally like seeing images that are like well-formed images. But some people don't. Some people will get like hear things, that come through sort of auditorily, or some people feel things and see textures, or just have a knowing. It's like everyone's so unique that the way things come to you will be dependent on just, kind of who you are and just, how your brain works.
Yeah, for me, later on in day 4, I was seeing like build outs of, which we later confirmed. And people are going to be like, what the heck, Chrissy? A build out of a patio and a location. It ended up being someone's house that was at the retreat.
Oh, cool. Wow.
Yeah,
so you're able to validate that.
We were able to validate. There was 2 experiences that I had there that I will share at one point in a podcast that will be separate as an audio. But I had 2 experiences that validated with 2 people in the room.
Wow.
It was wonderful. It was just such a connecting experience. I was mind blown. I cried a lot.
That happens.
Because because I just didn't was like, what's going on? And like, this is so amazing, but it's so, you're in it, like you're living in it consistently in those days. So it's just happening so fast and you're just trying to process while you go along, in context of how you now look at reality as well in your own consciousness. Yeah. But I want to go back to the one question, the first one, when I first listened to that beat, that binaural beat, when I was lying down and I ended up seeing color, the first meditation, is that like an array? If I can ask that, is it an array of different frequencies or binaural beats? Okay. Because
all of them are layers. They're all different layers of binaural beats, different mixes, anywhere from like 4 to like even up to 12 layers. It just depends on, the state. Yeah.
That's interesting because the first meditation we did, and then we went in and started to go back to another meditation that was Focus 10. I never got the colors. Like they weren't really as apparent. And then they would start coming back. Blues would start washing over me. And I remember getting a really lovely feeling, like a really warm feeling. And out loud, I think I said, come back at one point.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Because I was like, this feels so nice.
That's great.
Yeah, it was just such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I will highly recommend people to go to Monroe, and to give it a try and be open-minded to it. But now I have to ask one question, and I have to ask these questions because I think it's important that there is this, ideology of people going around and so worried about the CIA involvement that has happened in the past. And we get this modern day involvement that people think that it's a cult or there's a CIA or it's run by the government. So I guess someone said to me, and they scared the crap out of me before I got to Monroe, and I won't say who, but, and they said, Chrissy, you can layer a lot of things under binaural beats. And with that said, I should explain to people that there is this ocean sound, right?
Yep.
That is kind of overlaid. And it's like a white noise that's overlaid the progression of all the binaural beats. Because I
Yep.
remember saying to one of the teachers, I'm like, why am I not hearing any different sounds? And
Right.
they're like, oh, you won't. You're just going to hear that sound. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, for me,
Yeah.
I would have thought that because music really makes me visual, that I would
Mhm.
have this like, array of different melodies that I could listen to. I was looking forward to that. And then I realized I'm like, oh, it's not going to be that. And I was mildly disappointed. But then I was like, all right, just go with the flow. And then it scared me even a little bit more where I went, oh my gosh, you could really subliminally underlie anything, messaging, words, whatever it may be, under binaural beats. How does Monroe get around that question? And because I imagine people have asked this before, because people are very sensitive to what's coming, obviously information that's coming in now. And we live in a world that uses so much propaganda and so
Right.
many subliminal types of messaging that you would, a place that you're going to unravel your consciousness, you have to have a lot of trust that they're not doing that to you.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many things to unpack there. So the CIA, and we see a lot of this. A lot of it just sort of propagates online. It's everyone loves conspiracy theories. They're fun, and some of them, may be real. Who knows? But the CIA thing is so interesting because it illustrates how something can be just kind of taken and just moved to something that it never was. So like in the case of that, the way this happened, and so people make this claim like, oh, the Monroe Institute was founded by the CIA and was a whole CIA operation and all kinds of crazy stuff. And the way this really happened was Monroe is, Bob Monroe had his experiences. He founded Monroe Institute, and they were doing their thing and teaching people and running gateways. And someone, it was actually the Army Department of Defense, and there's the whole connection to like the remote viewing program. But they,
Right.
heard about what was happening at Monroe Institute and sent someone there to investigate. And he basically went through Gateway and wrote up his experience. And that was someone for Army Department of Defense. Then that document somehow made its way to the CIA, where it was then released under the Freedom of Information Act. So there was never even any involvement directly with the CIA. It was the Army who decided to send someone there to investigate what was going on at this Monroe Institute place. So again, like people take this and run with it and make up all kinds of fun conspiracy theories. But then in terms of like, subliminal, anything like that in the exercises, I mean, there isn't anything there. Where our mission here is to help people experience these states so that they can, understand better who they are. I mean, this has always been about empowering people to discover for themselves, who they really are and what reality is about. So we don't have an agenda. There isn't a reason, like we're not trying to convince you of anything. And this comes back to the cult thing too, because cults are founded on ideas and ideologies, and we intentionally don't have any of that. So we're not trying to tell you or explain to you how this all works. We're not trying to convince you to adopt any kind of belief system. People from all kinds of belief systems come to Monroe, whether you're religious or non-religious or whatever it might be. We're not trying to again convince you of a story. It's just here are the tools. We'll teach you how to have these experiences, and what you make of those and how you adapt that into your belief system is for you. Like it's about you discovering your truth, and everybody has their own truth. And that's why like this isn't about just kind of explaining to everyone how reality works. It's like you've got to discover that. Otherwise, you're just adopting someone else's belief system. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that there fundamentally we don't have a reason to embed any kind of suggestions or subliminal things, because that's not what we're trying to do. We're just trying to give you access to these tools.
Yeah, thank you for answering that, because I think it's important that people hear that from someone who works at the Monroe Institute, because
Yeah.
they're so right. And it scared me. And this was somebody that was formerly working in government at one point that made that comment to me. And I went, "Oh, but you don't scare me." But literally the day before I'm going,
Right.
Well, and this is for them. It's their lack of knowledge too, right? Like they know a little bit Monroe and they've never been to Monroe. So it was a moment where I went, you know what? I'm glad they brought it up. And it was important that they did because I think there's a reason for everything. And it was one of the first things I did say to one of the teachers when I was there was like, there is a lot of trust that's put in to people coming here because, you know, there isn't, you have this openness, right? And
Yeah.
right. And you don't want it to be subliminally messed around with from others. And there is
Yeah.
this trust, and ultimately you can tell that that everyone understands that there, and you can feel it too. There's very much a sense that is a very positive sense that comes in, and it's not an artificial positive or anything like that. It's very much, it feels very safe. I did when I was there for sure.
Yeah. And when people, we've had people that come and they're kind of nervous and they're not sure what to expect, or they have these, again, these kinds of ideas that there could be something harmful going on. When you've been there, so like when you experience it and you go there and you're on the campus and you're working with the trainers, like everybody, it's just so you just feel the sort of heart openness kind of energy. Like it's everyone who has that experience, it's like you just come to know. It just becomes certain that this isn't. I don't know. This isn't anything nefarious. This is so just again, heart opening. You're in this energy of the campus. I don't know. It's hard to explain, but generally people's doubts about that just melt when they come to campus. They see, oh, these are like real people. These trainers are not scary. Like we're all going through this together. We've all had these kinds of experiences. So that tends to just kind of dispel any of those doubts. But it's like, yeah, we can't just send everyone in the world to campus. So some of these things just continue to kind of propagate online. What's interesting too, though, is that sometimes you'll have people posting about this, and then someone will chime in who's been to Monroe, and they'll say, it's not like that at all. I've been there. It really is this amazing place. They're just trying to help everybody. So it tends to be that the people that have been to Monroe are kind of the best defense against these kinds of, kind of rumors and stuff that spread around. They just speak their experience and their truth. And that is what it is.
Yeah, it's true. And when I walked in there, I didn't feel anything related to cult or any of that.
Yeah.
This idea of, doing this in a group session, I think is really important. And for me, it was interesting because of who was brought up. Like none of us knew each other well, I shouldn't say we didn't know we were going to be going. A group of us didn't know that the one person would show up. And I knew about 3 people that were there in the creators group that I never even knew would be showing up. And so we were all really shocked to see each other in the same room.
I heard about that. Yeah.
Right. It was a very interesting manifestation on its own.
Yeah.
And moments that I realized where there's something that transmuted, and you could tell that people would be like, I wouldn't always choose to be in the same room as some of these people in here. If I'm not saying they're bad people or good people. It's none of that at all. There's just different energies in the room. Right. Mm-hmm. And so you noticed, and I noticed, and somebody else did as a participant, I ended up seeing about, I think a week or 2 after Monroe, she actually was up north where I was in Canada. And we talked about this. We watched the energy transmute. And so you saw those people that probably wouldn't have hung out with each other, decided that they would hang out with each other. So you saw this, like maybe a negative feeling or a negative energy transmute itself by the end around day 4, around day 3, day 4. And it was unbelievable. And the reason why I bring that up is that this group energy and doing this consciousness work, there has to be something to that, because I've had my own personal practice of consciousness and have gone through different conscious states before I went to Monroe, not fully understanding them until I actually got there and realizing maybe what kind of state I was in and how and why this might be happening. But since I've come back, it hasn't been as intense. And I feel that the group and a group setting has something to do with that, along with obviously where Monroe is in the world and the amount of people and energies that are just there in general. But there's something to do with the group setting that really magnifies or intensifies the consciousness experience. Am I accurate about that? And
yeah.
And
Absolutely.
what is it about that group setting outside of just Monroe in itself and the property that it's on and the people and the history that's been there? But what is it about the group setting with the binaural beats that creates this conscious connection?
Yeah. And it's great. We see that obviously that happens on campus, and you've experienced that. It happens even at our virtual retreats. So even people who are doing this over Zoom, because we offer it that way as well, the same kind of thing happens. So what I think is going on there is you've got people coming together and you've got this shared intention. So you're all there to explore, to open up, to experience, and like that shared intention of what you're there to do has a magnifying effect. Because a lot of people talk about manifestation and intention, and like the more people that share a common intention, the more powerful that is. So like when this group comes together and you've got that shared intention, it definitely has an impact. And I think what's interesting is there always seems to be like it's always the right group that comes together, for the right program. And it happens like like every program. We're doing these like every week. There's two on campus every week. There's a bunch of virtual stuff. And universally, people tend to say, wow, like that group was really just right for me. It's like everyone tends to get to the group that sort of makes sense for them. And however you want to read into that, whether it's kind of the universe kind of manifesting the right group or however it happens, people just tend to experience it that way. That it's like the group just comes together and creates that group dynamic, and it's always just right for people.
It is. It was such an interesting group of people from around the world, and even just their
Yeah.
backgrounds, their families. It was a very interesting dynamic and a very dynamic group generally, like very dynamic in the things that
Yeah.
they've experienced themselves and who they were.
Yeah. Well, I'd say too, because you're going through these experiences, and for many people, they're life changing. Like it's like you come out of that, a lot of times with a different understanding of what reality is and like who you are and the fact that you're more than physical. And you're often, it's often very personal. People are sharing their experiences when you're going in, after we do the exercises, you go into the debrief and people are talking about what they experienced. So you're really opening up, and we really create this very safe space within the group, and what people discuss in the group obviously stays within that group. Um, so you're having these really transformative experiences and sharing that with a group, and it creates a bond that lives beyond that program. So this happens all the time. Groups tend to stay together. A lot of times, groups that will do a program together, they'll continue to meet once a week and continue to share their experiences. A lot of times, they'll say, "Hey, let's go do another program together and bring the whole group back and do another graduate program." So it creates that bond. It's like it becomes your little family. And for a lot of people, like who are going through this kind of awakening, they might not have anyone else in their life that they can share these experiences with. Like if you're lucky enough to have a spouse or someone, close to you, who you can talk to and share these things about, it helps a lot. But for many people, they don't have that. So this group becomes their little sharing circle as well. And again, it just creates this magical, kind of bond because you're sharing such a deeply personal experience with this group. Yeah, it just creates that really tight, the tight knit group, that bond.
It's true. And I think it's important that you said that there's a lot of people that don't have people or outside networks that they can go to while they're going through some form of self-understanding or growth or awakening, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
I think when we use the word awakening, I love that word, but there's so many negative connotations around it that people can put too. So I think just going through self-exploration and understanding self and just growing as a person and understanding what reality means to you in your physical world and obviously maybe and beyond. And so I think for people that are looking for it, yeah, those spaces make sense. And Monroe is wonderful for it. When I went there was a lot of questions I had from previous experiences and said, hey, before we really dive into this, can I like unravel this a little bit so that I didn't want my perception or the focus levels to maybe change how I saw what those conscious experiences were, or having a different form of consciousness experience. And so I asked previously, and the Monroe was so wonderful to talk about it. I'd like to transition though into life after death, because it's such a big topic. When I was sitting at Monroe, I went to bed once, and the next day we all woke up and said, "How did you sleep?" And I said, "I was great, but I was contemplating my life." Before I went to bed. Exactly. And what it means to be human and alive. And I was contemplating all of this before I went to sleep. And what does it mean, that maybe we don't die in this concept of life after death. And so I was looking at my morality before I went to bed. And so everyone laughed a little bit, but I was like, no, it's true. And I think we should break down when people are going to Monroe, and there's life after death experiences that people are having, and then there's these consciousness experiences. When you
Mhm.
go to Monroe, are you experiencing or are you not experiencing a life after death experience when you're going through a different form of consciousness state?
Um, it kind of depends. I wouldn't say that by exploring these states, you're automatically going into this life after death kind of environment. That can happen, but not necessarily always. And it's sort of, again, it's dependent on the individual and kind of, where they are in their journey and what they're doing. Um, in terms of like how we'd classify these states, I guess Bob writes in his books the story of kind of what happened to him. And as he got deeper into these states, he did go and have these out of body experiences where he was essentially rescuing his other past life selves, at the point of death and kind of helping them along, to wherever they were going. So clearly, you can access these states where you're interacting with whatever happens after physical reality. And so we actually explore some of those states in graduate programs. Like there's one called Exploration 27, which explores what Bob Monroe called Focus 27, which is that environment where people go, consciousness goes after physical death. So yes, you can certainly explore those states. Many people also end up just having memories of past life experiences, or potentially seeing past life experiences or reliving past life experiences. All those things can happen, but it's very fluid. It's sort of it depends on the person, and it's kind of personal that journey, how it happens for everyone.
It is. It's such a personal experience. And if you've never really thought about your morality or life after death, it can be very unsettling. And I can
It
imagine
can.
for some it would be. And I know a lot of people maybe listening to this podcast are like, this is insane. That can't happen. I have not gone to that place. I've not
Right.
experienced that myself, but
Yeah.
we've spoken to many others that have been in Moreau programs or teachers that have experienced that have been in those, Focus 27 states
Yeah.
or state and have had that experience. So I'm not going to tell them that what they're experiencing obviously isn't real. That's not it. I
Right.
know that there's probably something more to that than, if you keep on your practice, you'll be able to achieve those consciousness states. But I know it's very unsettling. Because
It can be.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
for
it's
sure.
changing your understanding of who you are. And you touched on a good point, which is morality. And I think that's kind of an important one because this is one of the key things that I think changes in people when they have these experiences. And I think you have enough of these experiences, and especially when you have validating experiences, like sometimes people will have experiences of a past life, and they can then go validate actual details about that. They can get a name. Like, so we have one program called Lifeline, and the purpose of that program is kind of like helping people cross over, who have died. And this program has been going on for years and years, and they started collecting information, and they'd gone back and validated tons of this information. There was actually a special that was done on, I don't know if it was the History Channel. It was 10, 15 years ago, where they actually like traced one of these experiences out and were able to validate that this person connected with someone who did exist at that time and died and had that name and all the everything was right. But so anyway, to the point of morality, when you have an experience where like that you get that validation, and when you become convinced that you're more than just physical and you've had multiple lifetimes, it changes the way that you sort of approach life, right? If you realize like, oh, this is just one of, maybe 100 different life experiences that I'm having, you have a different version and identity. It sort of like changes what you think of as yourself. Like there's this small you that's here now having, this experience, and there's the big you that spans all of those experiences. And then, I went through this myself in my own awakening. I thought about like, well, if that's the case, like what's really important? Like, what am I here to do? And I was entrapped in all the things that we think are important, like, the career and getting the nice house and all that stuff. And I realized that, like, well, if I'm having these multiple life experiences, that can't be the goal. Like, if I'm going to live beyond physical death, I'm going to come back and have a different experience and do different things. It can't be just like, come here, acquire a bunch of stuff, and then leave and do it again. Like, that's no point to that. So, for me and many people, it changed my internal value system. And I started to really prioritize things like experiences and relationships. and things that help me be a better person, because those I think are the qualities that you carry with you as you go on through multiple experiences. Bob Monroe kind of got into this, and many people come to this understanding that we're here to grow and evolve as consciousness. And you do that through these multiple life experiences. And we're evolving towards, this state of love. Like that's kind of the ultimate goal is to be able to, get away from ego and all the things that divide us and cause lots of conflict in our world, and move towards this understanding that we're all really part of the same consciousness. So anyway, it's a good point. It changes your value system, and that is that can be hard sometimes. It's like when you've spent your whole life kind of assuming that things are the way they are, and then you see something different and it changes your values. Like it takes some adjustment. Sometimes it's like people have career changes, or they change their relationships in their lives because they realize the things that they thought were important in the past are really not that important.
Yeah, it does. And, I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's funny, when I left Monroe, I was like, I don't want to do anything anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll
not in a bad way. But I was like, I just want to live. Like that's all I really want to do, right? And just like relax and live, and grow, right? And that's really kind of how you feel. And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is good for my career, and I laughed. But the one thing someone asked me recently on a podcast that I was on someone else's show, and they said, Chrissy, I talk a lot about BCIs. I talk about edge science. I write about modern science, and I also write about UFOs. And people know that. Like I talk about UFOs a lot. I interview people that are academics around it, people that are in political positions. And so someone said to me, when you went to Monroe, what did you learn about potentially UFOs? And I kind of laughed, because I learned nothing about UFOs. I said at all. I go, but what I actually walked away with, and was another member walked away with something I think similar, or had it resonating within her, was I walked away and I said, I have to work with the other side. And for me, I'll explain what that means. I think that we have people, when I was speaking earlier about people in a room that you're like, I probably wouldn't have chosen to be with some of those people if I would have chosen that group, but ends up transmuting where, we're all embracing, hugging, and building these relationships. They're not bad people. None of us are bad people. We just come at the world from different perspectives, and we want the same things for the world. We want the good things for people, but we just do it differently. Some people might do it. I like to do things on a community basis. Some people do things in solo practices, right? And so they're not so outwardly open to different relationships, or they just operate different than I do. And it's a different energy operation is really what it is. And so when I realized that when that energy transmuted, and I watched it transmute, in a matter of 5 to 6 days, where we're all in a cuddle puddle together, I went, this is what I feel like I should be going to do, is working with that other side that maybe I'm kind of don't always decide to work with. And we live in this modern day cult society now, where we're, within our own segregated groups, and our group knows better and my group knows better. And it isn't that. And so for me, I realized I'm going to step out of that group and start spending time with the other group now. Doesn't mean that I have to understand or agree with the way that they might be doing something, but there might be a transfusion where it's able to transmute and change that, so there is a common understanding. And I think that's where we're in the middle of the challenge with today in society. And so when I watched it happen with that group, I realized, I was like, this can be done in a bigger form. And how do we go about to change this in a bigger form? Maybe it's my generation, maybe it's the next generation, that we're able to at least contribute to the transmuting of that energy, where we can find common ground and look at each other and say, I don't always agree with you, but we can find understanding. And I feel like that was something that I really left with, because I said, I've seen it with my own eyes, and none of us spoke about it. First of all, it wasn't like there was a conversation. It was just done by working together, or experiencing and spending time with each other and hearing each other's side, to obviously to grow empathy, and to realize that people they just operate differently.
Yeah.
So I'll end that with saying that was something I walked away with. I walked away with just having that feeling of, you know what, this is probably if we can transmute that type of energy, we could do this in a larger capacity.
Yeah.
And it starts with people just experiencing it and doing it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been now a new mission. Like,
That's
got to go
great.
step into uncomfortable territory that I probably don't always want to have myself in, but, and obviously make sure I'm safe, but be able to create understanding in different areas.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, what a great result, to come out of that. And I think that that speaks a bit to kind of the bigger picture, at Monroe and our mission. Um, you pointed out we live in this world with this world today. Obviously, we've got lots of division and conflict and us versus them, and it's like we're rooted in materialism, like this idea that the physical world is all there is. And when that's the basis of our society, it's all about like Darwinistic competition. Like it's me versus you, and like, I need to get all the resources, and it's all about, making sure that I've got everything I need. And it's like it leads us to where we are, where there's lots of division and conflict, and that kind of defines our society. We group ourselves into different levels, and we draw borders, and we fight against whoever they are. Many people that are going down this path of exploration come to this understanding that at the most fundamental level, again, we're more than our physical bodies. We're consciousness, but at the deepest level, we're all part of the same field of awareness. So like you think of like it's so like we're waves on the ocean, right? So like my experience of being an individual unit of consciousness is different than yours, but at the bottom level, like it's still we're all consciousness. There's one field of awareness. So this is lots of people who explore this space come to that conclusion, and that's a new worldview. Like that means that at some level, like the people that I think are all wrong and I hate, they're really a part of the same thing. It's like one finger on my hand hating the other. Like that doesn't make a lot of sense. Why should that be the case? We're all here growing and evolving together as part of this grand system of consciousness. It doesn't make sense for us to be fighting against each other. And I think if we were to adopt this understanding of the bigger picture of reality as a whole world, as a society, that would really change the way that we do things. Like we'd realize we're all connected. We'd be working together. We'd find other ways to cooperate and figure out how we can do things that help everybody, as opposed to just, I don't have to, you don't have to lose so that I win. So that's, I get, kind of the bigger picture. We call this the global awakening of human consciousness. And it's when we all come to understand who we really are and why we're here. And I think that's, from my perspective, I think that's the only way for there to be lasting change in our society. Like, I don't think we need different laws or better laws. I think we need, it's people that create those laws. It's people that create those systems. We need people to change. Like we need to understand who we are and how we're connected, and that the rest will follow. Then the laws will change or whatever has to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. I always say these things. I'm like, that's not real. Like when we make up these things, like they're not real. And so since we make them up, we can change them and we have choice to do that. So I do live by that mentality. I try to say even my social media and just in spaces where I'm like, hey, we have to stop thinking in this type of one directional thought, because it just doesn't make sense. It hasn't served us well. And we have to understand we all live on this floating rock.
That's right.
If we don't take care of it, we're all not going to be here. And who knows, that's not going to be nice. And I think we all just need to have a better understanding of self and others. That's for sure.
Definitely.
Paul,
right.
Thank you so much. It was so lovely to have you. It's so wonderful to talk about the tech side, but also even just obviously larger forms of consciousness and what does that mean to ourselves and others, and along with just a better understanding of the Monroe Institute. So thank you so much for being rebelliously curious with me today.
Great. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing the work that you do, because getting this out there is so important. This is what's going to, change the world, people telling this kind of story. So
Here's
thank
hoping.
you.